as you can see in the chat, I just asked you where you are because I think it's fun to know who I'm talking to and where they are. So what I prepared for this is a short check-in that we'll do online in a mural board where you will move around with your feet, and Biljana will send the link to that mural check-in in the chat so you can see it. So you can start entering that quietly while I am trying to explain the rest. So I'll end about 10 to 8 so that the next facilitator can go on. I'm going to go through a short PowerPoint presentation just to show you 6 anti-patterns for retrospectives. And if you have any questions, you can just stop me while I'm speaking. I really love to have questions, so that is great. So I can see that we have a lot of links here, and the link that I want you to go into is that mural check-in. That's the only one I want you to go into right now. You can go into the others, but that's the one I want you to be in. So I'm just going to share what it's going to look like. So what you see here is this mural board, and I would like you to vote with your feet about, and you can see there's a lot of feet here. I want you to vote with your feet about what your experience is with retrospectives. So if you know nothing about retrospectives and you just came because you want to know what retrospectives are and you didn't really know what to do with your Thursday evening, then put your feet here. If you know a little bit more, maybe you've been at a retrospective, you can put your feet a little bit more to the right. If you facilitated one team one time, you can put a little bit more to the right. If you facilitated more than one time, if you facilitated more teams, if you've been talking about it, if you've been teaching retrospective facilitation, if you've been writing about it, or if you've written a book about retrospectives, then you put your feet all over here. So please take a pair of feet and move your feet to where your experience is when it comes to retrospective facilitation. This is something that I normally do when I'm teaching a class about retrospective facilitation. I just ask people to stand on the floor if we're on site, and then let them distribute themselves over a line to see how experienced they are. And then what I do normally is I say that to the people who actually admitted that they don't know what retrospectives is, it's very brave for them to be there. And for the people who have facilitated retrospectives and who know something about it, I ask them to share their experiences and anecdotes and come with critical questions. And if I say this is the way to do it, maybe they say this doesn't work for me, so that's a stupid request, or things like that. So I'm interested in knowing where you are. And I can see.
Can I say something? Interrupt?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I'm joining from my phone because this is outside of my working hours, and I really wanted to be there, but I'm unable to connect through my computer. Hence, this requires an app which I'm unable to download from my phone.
That's fine. But it's not a big problem.
I'm running retros for years now, and it's a digital agency, but I improvise a lot. Hence, I really want to learn, and I need more ideas. I use Parable for it typically, or Miro, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So will you be able to see the slides on your phone while we're going through it?
Yeah, I'm seeing slides. Okay. I can enlarge. I can zoom okay. In. Everything Great. Is visible. I'm just not sure. There's just, yeah. A lot of feet on the left. What does this mean? Knows nothing. Oh, gotcha. Okay.
I can just move a pair of feet for you if you want me to.
Please, can you put me under
experienced?
I need more knowledge about it because it's too long and I'm out of ideas and challenges with retrospectives. I don't know, whatever.
That's great. Thank challenges so with retrospectives. I'll come to that later.
Yeah, that's what I need. That's where I am. That's why I'm here.
Very good. You. So what you see now is that we have two who are very brave. They've said they don't know anything about retrospectives, so I hope that they'll get an idea about that. And then we have some people who are actually very experienced in facilitating retrospectives, and we have a little middle ground here with some people who are somewhat experienced in facilitating retrospectives. And that's brilliant because that was sort of what I expected to have, and I can see some people are still moving things in there. Now, for the next thing I'd like you to do, and you don't have to do it right now, you can sort of do it while I'm speaking. I want you to think about what your challenges is with retrospectives. And Maya, you already shared that your challenges is that you need inspiration. Can I write that for you?
Yes, please. Inspiration, correct. And the second thing would be technical knowledge, meaning technical portion of facilitation.
Yes.
Yeah, in terms of softwares and best practices. Mm-hmm.
So that's so what I prepared is that first I'm just going to go through the PowerPoint with the anti-patterns, and then I'm going to show different ways of doing retrospectives online afterwards with some templates and stuff like that. So some of you might have the challenge that people don't want to go to the retrospectives, or it could be a challenge that people don't want to share, or it could be a challenge that we're always discussing the same things, or something like that.
Very often, if you want to really make it anonymous, it's really hard. That's also one of the challenges that could be at least when we discussed tough stuff, then really that anonymity is super important for big teams. So they can express freely, whatever they think about a particular topic.
So what you're saying is you would like some inspiration for how to make things anonymous.
Correct. Yes, please. Thank you.
Yep. So what you can see already with the mural is that if you invite people as visitors, they don't have to give their name. They're just visiting owls and visiting animals. So if we zoom into this, we can see introvert members, content switch, problems with the team, mature team, and they often don't have any topics for the retro. Yeah, there are some things here that I definitely recognize, and I'm just going to write down some notes, and then I'm going to look at this from time to time and see if there's anything I've forgotten. So thank you very much for sharing your challenges. I am hoping, of course, that the PowerPoints that I prepared will solve all these challenges, but I can already see that we'll have something to talk about afterwards. Are there any questions before I start sharing my slides? Anything you're wondering about? Anything you'd like to announce? Great, I'll jump into it then. I imagine that you can see my slides now. Yeah. So this is about retrospectives, about facilitating retrospectives. And I'm going to talk about the book that I wrote, because I've been facilitating retrospectives for about 15 years. And I wrote this book about all the mistakes I've made when facilitating retrospectives, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes. And as I talked to Alexander about before this started, the illustrator, the one who has made all these wonderful pictures of octopuses in my book, is actually from Serbia. So it's Serbian illustrations in a Danish book written in English. So it's a very international little book, this one.
Oh, that's wonderful. Can you share the name of the designer, please? Maybe we know.
Yeah, Nikola Korać. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but
never mind. Nikola Korać. Okay, thank you.
Nikola Korać, yes. And he's been wonderful to work with. He's very easy to work with. I said to him that I wanted illustrations, and he said, what kind of illustrations? And I said, can you do a red octopus? And he said, I've never made a red octopus before. But then he made me 8 different octopuses or octopi to choose between. And then I chose that one. So that's why I have red octopi in my book. And I can definitely recommend him if you need an illustrator. He's very, very good. Right. So my point is that when you've been to this meetup, every developer that you invite to a retrospective would look like this when they hear that it's retrospective time. And they're not trying to run away. They're actually dancing and jumping out of joy. So that is my humble goal with this, is that all the people you are inviting to retrospectives will be happy. As I said, I've been facilitating retrospectives for many years, and I facilitate retrospectives whenever I can. I do it with my husband and my children after each vacation. I do it with myself every year. I practically facilitate for everybody who doesn't get the chance to run away before I start facilitating. So to me, it solves almost every problem. But let's go through this. I said I wrote the book about retrospective anti-patterns. And I just want to say what an anti-pattern is first, because some people think that an anti-pattern is a very negative thing, but it isn't really. Some of you might know the patterns, which is a way of describing experience so that other people can learn from that experience. And I started using design patterns in my PhD, where I was looking at the Gang of Four design patterns and architectural patterns, the observer and visitor and composite that some of you may know. The interesting thing is that patterns is a descriptive form where you have a pattern name, which is very important. Then you have a domain, the context and forces. Then you have the pattern solution, which is an abstract solution to a common recurring problem. And implementing that solution then has some benefits and some negative consequences. Now, an anti-pattern is almost the same, but an anti-pattern is a solution that people implement again and again, but that actually turns out to be a bad solution, but people think it's a good solution. And then when you've implemented that bad solution, then you need to refactor it to a different solution. And that's what I'm doing in all the anti-patterns. I'm saying sometimes you make a choice, you make a decision, and then you're in this anti-pattern solution, which is not beneficial for the retrospective. And then how can you get out of that solution, or how can you do it differently another way? The interesting relation between a pattern and an anti-pattern is that a pattern, which is a good solution somewhere at some point in time, can actually exactly the same solution be a bad solution somewhere else. For instance, the microservices architectural pattern is a very good architectural pattern in some domains, but in other domains where people don't have the right skills, or maybe the domain doesn't really support it, then implementing the microservices pattern becomes an anti-pattern, because there are some things that gives it higher negative problems. So that's what I wanted to say about anti-patterns. And what I want to say about retrospectives is that, to me, a retrospective is a meeting that a team has together regularly in order to share what has happened, in order to appreciate what has happened, and in order to learn from what has happened. And the point here is that when everybody is reflecting together and sharing and appreciating both the positive and the negative things, then it gives them a chance to learn, but only if they do it in the right way. And that's some of the things that I want to look at. In the book Agile Retrospectives by Dana Larsen and Esther Derby, the first book about Agile retrospectives, they give a lot of interesting information about what a retrospective is, what activities you have, and what can go wrong. And what they do is that they say, well, whenever you have a retrospective, you have 5 stages in the retrospective. So these 5 stages that I'm going to talk about today are 5 stages that Dana Larsen and Esther Derby described in their book. The first one is setting the stage, where you're getting ready. This is where everybody gets a chance to check in one way or the other. We did a check-in together today because we were so many people, we didn't have time to all say something. But normally in a team, you are no more than 9 people. So you have a chance to have a check-in where everybody says something. And that check-in is quite important, that everybody says something, especially if it's online, because then they unmute themselves. And if they continue to be unmuted during the rest of the retrospective, it's much easier for them to say something again later. In setting the stage, this is also where you look at the action points that you decided on at the last retrospective, and you figure out whether you did them or not. You're checking in on them. This shouldn't be the only time you're checking in on the action points, though. They should probably be part of the Jira board. They should probably be something that you look at least every week to see if it gets implemented. Because if you spend time on coming up with action points because you've learned something, if you don't actually implement these action points, then it was a waste of time. The next part is gather data. And this is the part that most people think about when they think about retrospectives. They think about all these post-it notes, they think about the voting, they think about all the different things that went wrong and the things that went well. But it's actually only a part of the retrospective, this gathering data. If you only want to do the retrospectives because you think that you have to, you sometimes end up in something called a wheel of fortune, because you want to save time. Some people say, we don't want to waste time on the retrospective, so we'll make it super short, maybe just 30 minutes, and we'll use this start, stop, continue, and then we get it over with. And I sometimes hear people bragging to me that we're so good at retrospectives, we can do them in 15 minutes. We just sit around the table, ask people, is there anything that's not going well? And then if nothing is not going well, then okay, that's the retrospective. That's terrible. I wouldn't call that a retrospective. But even smaller problems can be problematic. I have an anti-pattern called Wheel of Fortune, and I call it Wheel of Fortune because it's a bit like when you're in a Tivoli and you turn this Wheel of Fortune and the little clicker says tick, 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 tick. And sometimes you get to a number where you get a prize, but sometimes you get to a number where you don't get a prize. And this can happen in a retrospective. If you, for instance, use the start, stop, continue, or do more, do less, or start or stop in the gathering data, and then you just jump directly from gathering data to deciding what to do. Let me give you an example. Many times when I'm facilitating retrospectives and I'm asking them to gather data, they say we should do more pair programming, we should have less meetings, and we should stop ignoring the pull requests. These are things that very often come up in retrospectives. And then if you want to have a very efficient retrospective and you don't want to waste any time, then you say, yes, this is going to be extremely good. So the more pair programming, we'll just schedule pair programming 3 days a week, 3 hours every day with 80% of the people, and then we solved it. And less meetings, yeah, we'll just skip every other daily, we'll skip every other refinement, and we won't do any retrospectives anymore because we don't want to waste time on meetings. And stop ignoring the pull requests. Well, we'll just implement a bot in our Slack channel to remind people to not ignore the pull requests. So very, very fast retrospective, only 20 minutes, we've solved all the problems. Or maybe not. Because there is a part of a retrospective that is called generating insights. And generating insights is a very important and very difficult and often ignored part of a retrospective. Generating insights means try to look at those things that you want to stop doing and start doing, and think about whether these are actually just symptoms and not the actual problems. So for instance, if the reason for not doing pair programming is that there's not enough psychological safety, or people don't have the technical skills to do it online or whatever, then scheduling more pair programming will actually make the problem worse. It will still be there because the problem is not that you're not doing enough pair programming, but that you don't know how to do it, or you don't feel safe enough to do it. So if you had spent some time on generating insights about why people don't do the pair programming, maybe you'd find the actual problem and solve that problem. And if you don't solve the actual problem, then the problem persists and it will just pop up somewhere else. It's a bit like putting a Band-Aid on skin cancer. You can not see the skin cancer, but it's definitely still there and it'll pop up somewhere else. Also in the let's have less meetings, I mean, obviously you can just remove some of the meetings and you have less meetings. But what if the point that people don't like the meetings is just a symptom of the fact that the meetings are bad and not that we have too many meetings? In those cases, if we just abandon half of the meetings and they're still very inefficient and bad and unconstructive meetings, the problem will be even worse. We'll waste even more time on meetings because we'll have follow-up meetings because those meetings didn't work. So if we spend a little time on generating insights, maybe we would understand that it's not actually the quantity of the meetings, but the quality of the meetings. And the same with stop ignoring the pull requests. Maybe the problem is not that people forget it, maybe there's a reason for not doing it. So in the generating insights, you should remember to have that stage. You should remember to talk about these things, all these post-it notes that come up, and try to understand why they're there. What are the causes behind them? Sometimes it's enough just to have a discussion about them. Sometimes it's important to have a 5 why or a 5 how, where you make a short course analysis. And sometimes you need to have something a little bit more. So there's a question, can you add post-mortem, please? Giovanna, are you asking me what a post-mortem is in relation to this, or what is your request here?
I'm asking to just add it like a form of a retro when the project is over, so to do the post-mortem as a retro. So is it a good practice or a bad practice?
I think that post-mortems are good practice. I think it's a good idea to make post-mortems. I think they're a little bit different than retrospectives. So in my mind, a retrospective is sort of a formative thing that you're reflecting in order to change what you're doing right now. So it's a recurring meeting that you do to retrospect, to always figure out, so where are we right now and what can we do about it? To me, a post-mortem after a project is ended is somewhere where you want to learn, perhaps as an organization. It's somewhere you spend a little bit more time on it. And it's something where you might make the results public to the rest of the organization or to the rest of the world. Some organizations do the postmortems if something has gone wrong, if there's been a security breach or something like that, and then they share the results with the rest of the organization. A postmortem is a very important thing where you learn about how to make the project better. To me, the retrospectives that I'm focusing on right now is the recurring team retrospectives, where you are learning as a team to improve the system that is the team. You're not trying to find out who to blame. You're trying to find out how to improve the communication, how to improve the testing process, how to improve how you're learning together as a team. I think postmortems are very important, but I think they're a little bit different than a retrospective. I don't know if that helped, Giovanna. Or...
No, I totally understand the retro and everything, the facilitation thing. I mean, I just wanted to add it because, for example, if you have the release, you do the postmortem after the release. So should we call it a postmortem, or should we call it like a retro release? Or
I think you should call it, yeah. I would call it a postmortem. Yeah, because it's so after the fact.
That was my question. I wanted to explain it afterwards, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So one of the things that you want to do with the retrospectives that I'm talking about right now is to try to figure out, why are things happening as they're happening? What is it that happened? What is it we knew? What is it that we thought? What was our expectations when we did what we did, and what happened? And if it's not enough just to talk about it, to understand it, sometimes you can have something a little bit more specific, like you can use a fishbone or a Ishikawa diagram to generate insights. If it's a complex problem that you're looking at, then it's not enough to just find one course. Then you might have to have a brainstorm on courses. And this fishbone diagram is one that I use if I have a very complex thing, but not for everything in the retrospective and not for every retrospective. But sometimes if I have the same thing that occurs again and again, for instance, it could be that we missed the deadline. And then, of course, you can say that it's the management problem that we missed the deadline. But we can also look at courses that we know. And maybe you say, let's ask the team, what are the causes for missing the deadline? And then they brainstorm, and then they say, well, it could be that we have too much tech debt. So we're building the castle on sandy grounds so that nothing can work. It could be that we have poor prioritization, where we are working at the wrong thing at the wrong time. Maybe the requirements are set too early. Maybe there's no motivation, there's no celebration of small wins. And then, of course, when you're asking people to brainstorm, they'll also come up with their own private peeps. For instance, one might say that we missed the deadline because my desk was too small, which is probably not the real reason, but you should allow people to brainstorm like that. And when you ask people to brainstorm like this, gathering data in a timeline or gathering data in a fishbone diagram or whatever, what happens most of the time is that the first 5 minutes, people are writing down a lot of things, and then they stop, and then they look at you and they'll say, why doesn't she stop this? This is so boring. This is so embarrassing. And if you can persuade them to then look at what other people have written and think about it still, or maybe putting +1s on the things that other people wrote, then their brains will stay, and you will get something which is in the long-term memory, things that they didn't think about immediately, but that pops up. But the thing about brains is that brains need time to remember things. And if you just allow them to finish after the first wave of things that they're thinking about, you will miss out on the second wave, which might be more important things. But that's one of the things that is problematic as a facilitator, is to facilitate that silence and accept that silence and understand how brains are working and understand that they need time. And especially if it's an online retrospective, it's very difficult to persuade people when they've run out of things to write, not to look at their email, not to look at the calendar, not to look at the shopping list for this weekend. But if you can explain to them that this is how brains work, that they need to still focus on this and maybe read somebody else's, then it might help. So generating insights is quite an important part of a retrospective. And if you don't do the generating insight, if you're jumping directly from gathering data to deciding what to do, then you might miss out on a lot of learning, and then you end in a wheel of fortune where you are trying to solve symptoms instead of problems, and then the problems are still there. The next part of a retrospective is, as I mentioned, the deciding what to do. And this is normally where people are looking at all the insights they've made, and then they say, let's do a brainstorm of all the things that we might do, all the little action points. And in those cases, it's important that these action points that they come up with are actually actionable. So having something like, let's have more pair programming, or let's have more interesting daily meetings, or something like that. It's not very good as an action point. You need something which is measurable. You need something which is specific. You need something with a timeline, really. When should we start doing this? And when do we know whether this is a success? And who is responsible for doing it is also quite important. Sometimes I call these things experiments instead of action points, because sometimes people are reluctant to change the way that they are working. They're reluctant to change the process or the way that they test things or the way that they work together. And in those cases, I call it experiments instead, because it's much easier for people to actually do an experiment instead of changing something. An experiment is a success, even if it fails, as you know. So it's easier to use experiments. There's a lot of discussions about how to decide what to do. How do you make decisions in a group? How do you come up with action points and proposals? So there's we could talk about this for an hour, but we won't go there right now. The last part is closing the retrospective, where I sometimes do a summary just to make sure that people know where the action points came from, because sometimes they're leaving the room and they're thinking, why are we going to do this? So just having a summary saying we gathered data, we generated these insights, this is what we learned, this is what we're going to do to help these things out. And it's important to look at the 5 stages of a retrospective, because it's important that everybody's on the same page when we're discussing. Some of you might know the De Bono's 6 Thinking Hats, which is a great book about facilitating meetings in general, where we're trying to make sure that everybody's thinking and on the same aspect at the same time. If we look in general at a meeting, the life cycle of a meeting, the meeting starts with people being in agreement about the topic. Hopefully they're in agreement about the topic. So this is all meetings, not just retrospectives, but you can see that it's the same. And then there's a divergence where people are sharing opinions, sharing experiences. We're sort of opening the floor and we're saying, okay, so these are the things we should talk about, but these things that go outside this is not something we should talk about at this meeting. Then we have the groan zone, where we are discussing, we're debating, we're not deciding anything, we're just figuring out what are the different things that we should take into account. And then we go into convergence, and we start to try to agree about it. We cut off some of the branches of the discussion, and in the end, hopefully, we agree on the decision. The interesting thing about this meeting, and also the different stages in a retrospective, is that some teams struggle with the divergence. You ask them for data and they're gathering data and they're completely silent. They don't know what to do. They don't want to write any post-it notes because they think everything is going well. And in those cases, it might be a good idea for you to change the activity, maybe do a team radar. I can show you one later, where people should vote for aspects instead of writing post-it notes. Or maybe you should make a positivity retrospective where they can only talk about the positive things, the strengths and the things that are successes in the team. Or maybe you make a future perspective where we're looking at the future, what will happen the rest of the year or something like that. So if people are reluctant in the divergence, try to change the activity so that it's easier for them to give you some data. And also think about the data doesn't have to be post-it notes. It can be burn down charts. It can be regression test results. It can be hotspots in the architecture. It can be anything you want. The groan zone is a part of the retrospective where you're generating insights. You're trying to understand. You're trying to make meaning. This can be a very difficult part of a retrospective, especially for engineers and developers, because we are trained to solve problems. So whenever we see a problem, we solve it immediately. And sometimes when you're asking a group of developers or engineers for problems, then they don't come up with problems. They come up with solutions. Instead of saying we struggle with this and this, They're saying, I suggest we do this, I suggest we do that. So as a facilitator, you need to try to keep this groan zone open. It sometimes feels physically difficult to keep this groan zone open with a lot of people who are problem solvers, but try to do it anyway. If they can't help themselves coming up with action points or proposals before you are going to that deciding what to do phase, then ask them to put it on a piece of paper on their table or put it in the document outside the view of other people. Because again, this with brains, if they have it here in the working memory, they need to get it out of their heads so that they can grab some things further down in their brains. So maybe they need to get rid of that proposal for an action point, and then they can stay in the groan zone together with you. The convergence is something that some teams struggle with, not so much engineering and development teams, but sometimes there are cultural problems with the convergence phase. If you're working with people who are not used to making these decisions themselves, you should understand that this is a part of the retrospective where you should support them. So as a facilitator, when you have a team, in general, you need to figure out, are they struggling with divergence, with the groan zone, or with the convergence? And then you should focus your support, focus your facilitation on that part, because it's important that they go through all of them, because otherwise they jump to conclusions or they don't conclude anything. Now, even if we are following these 5 steps in the retrospective and we're making sure to generate insight, sometimes it might go wrong still. Here's another Serbian illustration where the poor octopus is trying to lift the weight and it can't lift the weight. And one of the interesting things about octopi is that 60% of their intelligence is in their tentacles, and the rest is up there in the headish thing. So an octopus is a little bit like a team, right? Where all the team members have their own intelligence, but together they have a common intelligence, a summarized intelligence. And that's why this octopus that's trying to lift the weight is actually a really good illustration for this anti-pattern. In the soup, anti-pattern means that the team is spending a lot of time trying to solve something that they cannot solve. So if you see a team having a recurring thing that comes up and they continue to discuss it, and it's something that they can't change, then it becomes a complaint session instead. They're just complaining about something that other people should change. So if you see that, then you can throw this activity in. So this is the refactored solution to getting out of the soup, is that you draw 2 circles after you've gathered data, and you say, let's take the things that you've gathered data about and put it into this. And if it's something that you can do something about, we'll put it in the middle. If it's something we can influence, we put it in the outer circle. And if it's in the soup, we put it completely outside the circles. And things that are in the soup are things that the team can't do anything about. They can't even influence it. It is something that they have to accept that they cannot change and adapt their life around it. It is, of course, okay for people to complain about things, even if they can't change it, but they shouldn't complain about it every other week or every day. That just drags the energy out of everybody. So this is a way to sort of let people visualize, okay, this is something I'm really irritated about, but I can't do anything about it. So maybe the action here is, how can I adapt? Can I switch to another team? Can I switch to another organization? Can I put on my headphones, whatever? I do this extra activity after gather data. So imagine that we have a timeline or something like that, a start, stop, continue, and then I ask people to take representatives from that into the soup. And maybe it looks like this, that we have too much tech debt. That's in the do. That's something we can do something about. The communication with the testers is bad. That's in influence. That's not something we can do on our own because we need some other people. And then we have some things in the soup. It could be that COVID makes it hard to socialize. And then what you could do here is that you can just say, let's only discuss the things that we can do something about. Because if we're in a situation where the team is thinking that the retrospectives are not really working, they're a waste of time, it might be because you're spending all your time on something that you cannot change. And in those cases, they are a waste of time. So if you feel that tiredness in your team, maybe focus on the things that you can do. But it can also be interesting to generate insights on this. So sometimes when you're talking about it, maybe we can't change COVID, but maybe we can change how we socialize online. Maybe we can't change the communication with the testers, but maybe we can change how close we are to the testers or how often we talk to them. So this is the way I use it when I gather data. I also sometimes use it when we are deciding what to do, because people come up with proposals for action points, and you look at the action points and some of them are great, but other things are things that they can't do anything about. And if this is what they decide to take away from the retrospective, then they will be frustrated because they can't do it. So for instance, if they want to change the location of the company, and that's an action point, not really doable for them. And also if they want to get better meetings, probably not something they can change on their own if it's meetings with other people, but code review all major changes, that's definitely something they can do. But it could be that when you talk about these things, maybe they can carve out some actions that they can actually do. So it's something that becomes within their circle of influence. When we're talking about who to invite to a retrospective, I normally say it's just the core team that you invite to a retrospective. And you don't invite the managers in the retrospective, you don't invite other people in the retrospective. But sometimes if you see that there are things in the circle of influence or in the soup that they really, really want to change, then perhaps you can think about inviting more people to the next retrospective, because the more people you are, the bigger the circle of influence is, as you can imagine. So that's in the soup. The next one I want to talk about is Prime Directive Ignorance. Now, the first book that was written about retrospectives is written by Norm Kurth. Before he wrote this book, we only talked about postmortems, but he wrote this about project retrospectives. He talked about retrospectives after a project was done. That's not something that you talk so much about anymore, but maybe you should. And one of the things that he did is that he described something called the Prime Directive, and I'm just going to let you read this on your own. What this Prime Directive says, in short, is that everybody did the best they could at all times. And if you think that they didn't do the best they could, it's not the right mindset to enter a retrospective with. So Norm understood that not everybody can truly believe that everybody did the best they could all the time. He understood that it is difficult for people not to want to find somebody to blame. But he also understood that if you try to have this mindset that everybody did the best they could, then you get a lot better retrospectives, because then people will be interested in finding out how to improve the system instead of finding out who to blame. And one of the things in retrospectives is to actually, as we talked about, to share, appreciate, and learn, and to understand everything is to forgive everything. So if you accept that people did the best they could, then you get a much better retrospective, because people won't be sort of trying to protect themselves. If people think that you're not there to find somebody to blame, then they will share the problems that they have. They will share the things that didn't go as expected. But if not, they might not share it. And then the retrospective will be a waste of time. So that's what I call the Prime Directive Ignorance. And the problem is that sometimes when you're a facilitator, you ignore the Prime Directive, because you think it sounds a little bit hippie-like that everybody did the best and we should truly believe that. And then you skip over it, you don't talk about it. And then you're missing out the chance of expressing to people what mindset they should have. And you don't have to use the Prime Directive in like with the exact words. You can also just say, well, remember that everybody did the best they could. Just write it in the email introduction or something like that. The problem is that we are so much brought up with finding scapegoats. It's something that happens already when we're children. Our parents are asking who broke that vase, who left the milk out on the table, or who started that fight. So it's something that we're brought up with, trying to find somebody to blame and put them in jail or give them a fine or something like that, instead of trying to find out what is the problem in the system, what's the problem in the process, what's the problem in the communication, why did they think this would work well? Perhaps the problem is not that the kid is an idiot and that's why they broke the vase, but maybe they didn't think about playing football in the living room is not a good idea. Maybe we should just change the process so they don't play football in the living room, but outside instead. And it's the same with grown-ups. They're just children with bigger feet and bigger loans. The next anti-pattern I want to talk about is the loudmouth. And you might have some loudmouths at your retrospectives where people are talking all the time. They might be interrupting, they might be talking a lot. And the anti-pattern is to just allow the loudmouth to talk, because you don't want to interrupt them. It's a bit embarrassing. Maybe they have something interesting to say. And the refactored solution is that if you have plenary discussions, then the loudmouths will have a field day. They'll just talk and talk, and the silent ones will be silent. People are different. People come from different cultures. Some cultures supports that you talk all the time. Some cultures supports that you're listening all the time. It's also different brains. Some people are active thinkers. They need to talk to think. Some people are reflective thinkers. They need to shut up to think. And if you have a room with people who are active thinkers and reflective thinkers, the active thinkers will talk in order to think, and the reflective thinkers will not have a chance to think because the active thinkers are saying so much. So what you should try instead of having all these plenary discussions where everybody can get a chance to say something, try to divide people up. If it's on site, you can divide them up in pairs. If it's online, you can do breakout rooms, and then do this think, pair, share. Instead of asking a question to everybody, ask something. What do you think about this? And then ask people to think about it for 30 seconds on their own, so that the reflective thinkers get a chance to think. Then talk to somebody else for 2 minutes, and then the active thinkers will get a chance to think, and then allow them to share. Then everybody has been activated in this, and nobody can just sit also and be quiet and do something else in the retrospective. The next anti-pattern I want to talk about is do it yourself. Because in many situations, it's always the same person who's facilitating the retrospectives. It might be a team lead, always the one. A scrum master, always the one to facilitate the retrospectives. The problem with that is manifold. If you are a part of the team and you are facilitating, then you're wearing two hats. The one hat is the one where you're facilitating. You're looking at, okay, so which phase are we in right now? What are people discussing? Should we put a soup activity in here? Should we divide people up into pairs? Is there somebody who's not active? Should we change the way that we're communicating here? And if you do that, if you facilitate, if you're thinking about that, you can't be part of the team and get a retrospective. You can't be part of the discussion, so you don't get a retrospective yourself. On the other hand, if you do take part in it and you do take part in the discussions, then you will not be able to facilitate very well. So it's important that you choose hats, and for that, you can get other people to facilitate the retrospective from time to time. Maybe somebody else in the team can facilitate, or maybe you can have an organization-wide facilitation spreadsheet where you say all these teams need facilitation and all these people would like to facilitate, and then you just facilitate each other's retrospectives, because then you learn from other people's facilitation and you get a chance to actually be facilitated yourself from time to time. If you are asking some people to facilitate who are not experienced in facilitation, then if you're working online, it might be a good idea to use one of the online facilitation tools. This is an example of the Nitro facilitation tool. So there's Nitro, there's Retro, where you can sign up as a facilitator, and it just takes you by the hand and takes you through the phases of the retrospective. And it allows you to say, okay, now you need to vote, now you need to group, now you need to find action points. So you don't have to be very experienced to use this. There's also some dialogue sheets that you can download and print if you're having on-site retrospectives, which makes the retrospective like a board game. So there's some easy fixes to facilitate retrospectives if you want somebody to facilitate who are not that used to facilitation. And these tools have settings where you can be more or less anonymous when you are facilitated in the retrospective. Sometimes you can have a tool where you can't see what other people are proposing when you gather data until you've put something into yourself. So if you have a team where somebody is like, in a sense, it is high in the hierarchy and everybody is looking to that person to see what they're saying, and they're not saying anything until that person has said something, then it might be a good idea to use a tool where you're anonymous, because then you're not grounding people to say the same thing as this anonymous leader or the one that's high in the hierarchy. So there's a lot of these things where you can do something anonymously. And this is the so this is the anti-pattern called do it yourself. And then the last anti-pattern I want to talk about before I start like showing the different templates and we can have discussions about the things I talked about is disregard for preparation. And disregard for preparation is an anti-pattern that talks about online retrospectives, because when people started to do more online retrospectives before COVID, now everybody has done it, but before COVID, when people started doing it, they thought that facilitating an online retrospective was the same as facilitating a retrospective in real life, and it isn't. It takes more preparation. For one, you can't just go into the room and draw on the whiteboard. You have to prepare some things on the whiteboard. You need to figure out what kind of document you want to use, and you need to send a link to people. And what I normally do when I'm expected to facilitate an online retrospective is I send a link the day before so that people can get a chance to access the link to see if they can actually access it in the right way, because otherwise I spent the first 3 minutes of the retrospective where people are saying, what link? Is it the same link as last time? Do I need to log in? And then you lose 3 minutes. And also send an email 15 minutes before and remind people to get a cup of coffee and a bio break, because otherwise some people will be there on time and then they will say, oh, Peter's not here. Well, then I can go get a cup of coffee. And then when they get a cup of coffee, Peter comes back. And when he notices somebody else is not there, he's like, I can get a cup of coffee then too, bye-bye. And then the first 10 minutes are gone. And that's actually a pretty big percentage of the time. I normally say for an on-site retrospective, 1.5 hours. For an online retrospective, a little bit more than an hour and 15, or an hour and a half is great. But it's still a quite high percentage if you lose the first 10 minutes of a retrospective. So send an email 15 minutes before to remind them to go to the toilet before they sit down, because then they can also focus a little bit better. Insist on video for everybody. When you're facilitating, it's so important for you to read people's body language. And when it's an online retrospective, the only thing you have is the head. And if you don't even have the head and people are muted, it's impossible for you to know whether people really want to say something, whether they're really angry about something, whether they've fallen asleep completely, or whether they're doing something else with their phone. So as a facilitator, you should tell people how important it is for you to do a great facilitation, that you can actually see them. And at least when they're speaking, you should be able to see their faces. I know that some people have a bad Wi-Fi connection. I know that some people have some cultural problems with being on video, but try to ask them politely. And you can also say, oh, in the beginning of this retrospective, we should all find something red to show in the beginning of the retrospective. And then they turn on the video and then maybe they keep it on. If they persist to not be in video, then talk to them one-on-one and find out why they don't want to do it, and explain to them why it's important for you. It's not just for fun you want to see them on video. It's actually a quite important tool. Then we have the problem now coming back after COVID, that we have these hybrid retrospectives where some people are together in the office and other people are remote. And I can see that in some meetings, it might make sense to have a hybrid meeting if somebody is presenting or something like that. But for retrospectives, it's really important that everybody's equal, because if somebody's sitting together in a retrospective, there might be some communication going on between the people in the same room that the people who are remote miss out on. So try to make everybody equal. If somebody is remote, everybody should be remote. And I'm sometimes invited to facilitate these hybrid retrospectives. And I say, well, if somebody is remote, everybody should be remote. And then they say, that's stupid, Aino. We have such a great video consulting room here. Then 5 of us can sit in that room. They can have such a great time. And I say, yeah, that's exactly the problem. I don't want 5 of them to have such a great time when the 3 others are just hanging like pictures on the wall, because it really is difficult to make everybody equal. Because the level of communication should be the common denominator, the lowest common denominator. Otherwise, some people miss out. I've even tried once I accepted to facilitate a retrospective where I was the only one remote. So I was just on the screen on the wall, and I was trying to scream at people, go to that, and please read that, and please go there, and please stop discussing, and please write these post-it notes. It was completely impossible. And it gave me a taste of that medicine myself. Now I knew what it felt like to be a participant who was only there remotely. If it's only one person who is remote, then you can use the avatar system, where somebody who's there can be an avatar and they can walk around with their phone and they can show them things and they can be in direct communication, but that only works if it's one. And then don't record it. Just don't record the retrospective. It's such a stupid idea. So I want to just finalize this presentation and then we can go to the templates and the discussions. So solve the problems, not the symptoms. Make sure you're all on the same page so that some people are discussing data, some people are generating insights, some people are deciding what to do. Make sure that you're actually doing the same thing at the same time. And if you want to allow time for small talk, then enter the online retrospective or the on-site retrospective 5 minutes before, and then make it a rule that if people want to sort of small talk or ask you a question before everybody else, you are there 5 minutes before. And focus on what you can do, not what other people should do. And deal with the things you can't change. And when I say deal, it's either accept and shut up or find some way to adapt around it, because it just drains the energy to have people constantly complaining about things you can't change. And make it safe for people to shut up. In that setting the stage, you can build a little bit of psychological safety by allowing people to create a relation between each other. So psychological safety and trust is built on relation and reliability. And that relation means that people can relate to each other as human beings. So sometimes I ask in that round where I ask a question, what are you looking forward to on vacation? Or what was the last meal you ate? Or what's the next movie you will see, or something like that, so that they know a little bit more about each other. It just makes it easier for them to ask questions. It also makes it easier for them to ask for help, or to say when there's something they're stuck with. And then have a meeting facilitator for every bloody meeting, not just the retrospectives. It's really important. And then if I send the slides, there's like 35% for my book if you want to buy it. But I think I'll send the slides or something like that. Right, Alexander?
Of course, and they're going to have it recorded, so
yeah, awesome. Right,
like
so
digital era.
Yeah, digital era, yes.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do now was to show you some different things, and then you can ask me some questions. Let me see. So this is the one that we started with. The thing about introvert members, I think it goes together with the thing I talked about with plenary discussions, that those plenary discussions are not very good for introvert members. Ask them to think on their own, and then divide people out in breakout rooms, and maybe use some more writing instead of talking. That might make it easier for them to say something. Probably the confidence to say what they think. Well, it's the same if you can create a room where people feel safe and they know that what you're talking about in the retrospective doesn't leave the retrospective. It might make it easier for them to say what they think. But also your reaction to what they're saying will probably change how safe they feel about it. And I know that you can't build the psychological safety at the retrospective, but you can build it a little bit with the way that they communicate. And if you can do something in the beginning that they can laugh together at, for instance, ask, what was the last sprint like, if you should describe it as a weather forecast, or what's your team if you should describe it as a car, then they say something that will make them laugh. And if they laugh together, they get all these happiness hormones while they're together, and then they think they like each other more. So you can trick them into thinking they like each other, and then it'll be easier for them to maybe say something. Mature team, and they don't often have any topics for the retro. I'll come back to that. The anonymity, well, you can create the anonymity in many ways. Of course, obviously, it would be great if we didn't need anonymity, right? But it's the same thing with the symptoms and the problems. Sometimes you just have to solve the symptoms if you can't solve the problems. If you can't solve the problems that people don't feel safe around each other, then you need to solve the symptoms with a hack like anonymity. But what I wanted to show you was this is my website where I wrote a blog post about how to facilitate distributed retrospectives. And I have some templates here for different kinds of retrospectives that you can go into. I have this 6 stinking hats retrospective that you can copy and make your own. I have this retrospective template, the simple one that you can copy, and it's quite easy just to use these things and to move around on these things. I like the Google drawings because they're simple. I also know that and if you want to try it out, there's a link in the chat for this, I believe somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. There. So you can try this out if you want to, and copy this if you want to. And then, as I said, there's this Nitro that you can use, and it has a lot of different retrospectives, and all these templates are made quite fun. The Value Bricks retrospective template, and all sorts of things, Egyptian methodology, retroception from Canada with love. It's just like a lot of different fun retrospectives that you can just use, and it's sort of taking you by the hand and helping you through. Another thing that you can use is Mural, and Mural has a lot of templates for retrospectives, and I've made my own template here for the weight retrospective. So I start with a check-in, throw away one thing you don't like about your work, frame one thing you like about your work, and then I gather data here. And I just gather data quite openly. And then when people have added a lot of different data, no vision presented at the meeting, new member in the team, the day the test did not fail, then I have this saved for later down here that I can move. And then I have these aspects, and I say, well, now I put this up here, and I say, move these data around so that the things that are good are at the top and the things that are not good are at the bottom, and then people will move it like this and vertically. And then I have another aspect that I move up here, and I say, okay, so now I want you to move the things that you can do over here and the things that you can't do over there. So they're sort of moving these things we can do something about, these things we can't do something about. And then when they have put these things in there, you say that the things that are working well, that you can do something about, you should just celebrate. The things that are not working well, but you can do something about, you should fix. The things that are going well, but you can't do anything about, you should say thank you to somebody. And the things that you can't do anything about, but you need to do something about, you should delegate. So you see that this is a little bit different, where people are just first asked to come up with a lot of things that are working or not working well, or incidents, and then you make them sort of reflect on the post-it notes by looking at them again and moving them around. And then while you're talking through this, you might come up with some action points for things to do. So what you can do is that you can prepare these retrospectives, and then you can put a big thing on top of them that only the facilitator can change, so that you can sort of, you can make the magic happen at the retrospective. So 12 minutes left. That was all the things I prepared. I'm hoping that there might be some questions or comments or something like that.
Guys, be free to ask any questions if you would like to get an answer. So now it's the moment.
The next 12 minutes is the moment. You can also be quiet for 10 minutes.
The 11th moment.
I don't believe in
11th
that.
hour.
Sorry, what did you say?
I will be 11th minute or 11th hour. I don't know the book, the name of the book, but there's something like that. So this was really helpful for me. I really want to send my biggest appreciation both to you and the organizer. I have two questions. One is technical and one is a little bit different. I presume, and this is going to Agile Humans, will get all these links from the chat somehow via the email, or because I'm on my phone. And those resources are valuable for me to try them out.
Yes, I think so. Biljana got all the links, so I think that.
Don't worry.
And the code for the book. Yeah.
Don't worry.
And my question is, have you ever had in your experience teams that you were working with that were particularly connected as family? So I have a specific situation when it comes to my team. We have brother and sister, mother and daughter, father, so two couples. So they are very personally connected, which works well in terms of dynamics, how we work, and it has been like that for years. We are really like a family. But when it comes to retros, I believe that's where the anonymity request comes from, because they're connected privately. and they want to be perceived as independent, and that's what we always, of course, emphasize on. But is there any suggestion from your side how to them that this, because when you work in a software company, specifically on digital advertising side, everyone knows there's no anonymity.
Yeah.
So that doesn't exist on internet. It's a matter of trust, I know, and we very often do it like freely, without anonymity thing. But for example, I did some exercise going green. I don't know if you've heard about it, when you try to make your schedule, to pump you up and remove stuff that drains you and da 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 da. It's important for them sometimes. So that's my question. Any tips or experience and when having a family as a team, sort of real family?
Yeah,
cousins and couples and...
So it's a company where there's a family in the company. So they're not just working together;
Correct.
they're also family members. Correct. And your question
Correct.
is, how do I make it anonymous?
Camera.
Is your question, how do I make it anonymous? Or is your question, how do I avoid making it anonymous? Or is your question, how do I make it really anonymous so that they can't tell who they are?
Oh my God, you are so smart. My question is, how do I show them or prove them that they are really anonymous from the technical side of point? Because nothing is anonymous. That's what we all know. I mean, we are talking now, if I mention ashwagandha on this call, I will get ashwagandha ad next time I go online. So you're aware of it. So everyone's aware of it, right?
Yeah. So if
makes sense.
Yeah. So one thing that I started using was these Google drawings. And if you go, I don't know if anybody can go into that link. I just need people to go into the link. They don't need to do anything. Maybe not you, Maya, because you're on the phone, but it would be great.
Yeah.
You don't have to. The point is that I want you to look at the screen right now. And what you see here is that the people who are going in are now anonymous alligator, anonymous dolphin, anonymous goose, anonymous rhino. And you don't even know who you are. You don't know what animal you
but
are.
Whatever, they recognize each other based on the language they use, they know
yeah.
who
Okay,
they
then
are.
it's something else, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Let me show you
Of course
something
they
else.
know their family. They recognize, even if they're not family, when you work long together, you know how everyone is writing in English, what punctuation they use,
right.
what is their style.
So what I will do instead of them writing something, I would have them voting for something. So Team Radar is one that I do if we have that problem with anonymity, but I also use it if people have a problem with writing in general. Like if people are not native English speakers, they don't feel confident with writing.
Yes.
I say,
Correct.
Here's a radar where I have some spokes, and you can, this has a lot of spokes. I normally don't have more than 4. So motivation, courage, communication. And then you collect the votes anonymously and you put the votes on that. And then you get a picture of what everybody thinks. And then if you see that, here's another example. Let me see. Oh, I wish there were some good examples.
It's a great tip, really. I've never seen this. Thank you so much.
So this is called Team Radar, and there's a lot of them out there about how to do it. And the point is that here's an example where you can see that multiple people have voted, and when multiple people vote, they get different different forms here. And then you might say, okay, so this one, for instance, this one's called fun. There's somebody who said we're only on a 4, and somebody who said we're on a 9. And then you can say, oh, I can see that this aspect is something that you disagree on. Maybe we should have a discussion about this. Or it could be that you have one where everybody agrees that it's low. For instance, the partner contact here, where everybody made it very small. And maybe some of the things where everybody's happy, you don't need to discuss that. One thing that I've sometimes used for this with this team radar is if I'm facilitating for the same team over months, then I make the team radar every time. And then we look at how the team radars change over time. So we can see that some of the things are getting better and some of the things are getting worse. So it's sort of it's like a check-in, like a temperature reading or something like that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Are we also quiet, or we are going to ask some more questions?
I want to ask one more question regarding the facilitation, regarding the
Come on.
other team members, as you mentioned in your slides. So as you're saying, so for example, in the retro, the Scrum Master is the facilitator, of course. Are you saying that other team members should facilitate, or for example, we're having the stream teams. So we are working, for example, pretty much on the same product, but different components. So are you saying, for example, if some of the other team should go to the other team's retro and then facilitate, does she needs to know or he needs to know the pain points of that other team or no? I mean, this is a little bit confusing to me because if we want to be transparent and also if we don't want our pain points to be transparent to our other team, how we should do it. Should we do it or not? So I'm a little bit confused. What did you mean regarding who should do the facilitation then?
Right. So there are many things in this subject. I thank you for the question. So I'm trying to, I'll try to carve different things out of your question. What I said was that it can sometimes be beneficial if you are part of the team and you want facilitation to have somebody else from within the team to facilitate. I have been in teams where some of the developers want to facilitate from time to time. And then when they facilitate, you can sort of be part of the retrospective yourself. And they can see how difficult it is to facilitate. So maybe they'll appreciate your work a little bit more. So that was one thing that I said. The second thing I said is that it might also, or instead, be a solution to have other people from the organization to facilitate your team. Again, so that you can be part of the facilitation, you can see how they facilitate, maybe you can get some inspiration. The problem, as you say, is maybe the team is worried that their pain points will become a laughing stock in the other team. So you need to figure out, how can I get a facilitator that will promise not to tell tales about this team and laugh at them in the other teams. The point about being a facilitator is you really have to keep quiet about what's happening in the retrospective. And like it's different personalities, but it's also about creating that trust with the person. Some people are probably more trustworthy than others. I've sometimes facilitated in organizations where the management came to me afterwards and say, please tell me what they said at the retrospective, because I'm so curious and you're so good at making them talk. And I say, no, I can't say anything, because if I say something to you, then they won't say anything to me anymore. And it's a team thing. So I understand what you're saying, that it's a team thing. You don't want other people to look at your pain points. But at some point, you might have to trust also that a facilitator won't tell a tale. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, yes and no, of course, because then you need to be a really good of reading people, because sometimes, you know, somehow someone is saying that he is like trustworthy, but then goes, for example, to the manager and say, hey, I saw that and that, you know. So it's a little bit difficult. So that is why I asked this question, because I have 4 teams and it's pretty much, I mean, I'm the Scrum Master there. I know their pain points, and of course they're like crossing, because sometimes they are like working together and having the same points. But if we like show them to other team, hey, they say this and this, that you are not doing well, or this and this, I think that it's not going to end well. Then this is why I am having thoughts regarding it.
It's also a problem, or it's a symptom of a problem with the culture, I think, because it would actually be beneficial for other people to see that other teams have pain points as well. Because they might look at the other teams and think they're just doing so well, they're doing everything great. It's only our team who's messing up. So sometimes it can be good for the culture to see that other teams have problems as well. But then you need to know that the culture is not so that they're going to the manager and people are getting fired and people are laughing at people. So it's not easy if you have a culture where people will do that. And then
I'm not saying that I'm having a culture. I'm just thinking upfront, maybe that will happen.
Yeah.
So,
but I'm
only my thoughts.
Yeah. Yes, it might happen, but it might also maybe change something in the culture, you know. If I don't know if the culture is like that, but if you're saying it might happen like that, let's imagine that, then maybe something good will come out of it. Maybe they will see, okay, other people can make mistakes. Maybe it's easier for us now to share our mistakes, because I'm saying that all these retrospectives should be just within the team. It shouldn't be recorded on video. People shouldn't talk about what happens at the retrospective. What happens in the retrospective stays in the retrospective. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we didn't have to? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could share with the rest of the organization, these things didn't go as expected. We learned this along the way. So it might turn into something positive.
A lot of good and useful tips tonight. I'm even wondering how our next retrospective is going to look like, really, according to these tips. But okay. Any more questions, guys? Yeah, there are a lot of beautiful comments in the chat.
Yeah, I appreciate all those comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, guys, if there is no more question, I would like to use this opportunity on behalf of Agile Humans to say very, very huge thank you, Aino, for this session. It was certainly very useful and very, very inspiring. I was putting some notes in my to-do list, and I'm pretty sure that tomorrow I'm going to share my thoughts with my team, because and I can't wait show them video, because they need to see that.
Good.
They need to see this, really. Thank you for the session one more time. I officially invite you, all of you guys, as you probably know, this is not going to be the end for tonight, because it's our anniversary, and as a present to you, we decided to put 2 meetups, one after another, as part 1 and part 2. So you can use these 8 more minutes to make new coffee, to prepare some meal, or to refresh yourself, because for about 8 minutes, Joe Justice will join us, and we are going to talk about one very, very interesting topic related to Tesla and to Elon Musk. So I know, refresh, and we hope you're going to be part of the next session too.
Thank you.
So
Have a
guys,
nice evening.
8 minutes, and we are going to see one more time tonight.
Good luck with your retrospectives, everybody.
Thank you so much.
You really helped, Miss Corry. So really, I'm super grateful and thankful, and thank you, Alexander and Vilena, for making this happen. See you guys.
Thank you, Maya.
You're amazing. Bye.
Bye.